What would happen if you were to ask a different studio to remake an existing game? I'm not talking about a modern remaster or a decades later sequel, but instead just giving the same design criteria to a different group of people and seeing what came out at the other end. It wouldn't be the same game, sure, but would it be better or worse? Hi, I'm Calivan, and today we're going to take a look at Empire Earth 2 and see what happens when a new team takes a fresh look at an existing idea. The story behind the Empire Earth series is extremely convoluted, and even after quite a bit of digging, I've been unable to get a full understanding of the facts. My educated guess is that the rights to the Empire Earth IP were held by the publisher rather than the studio, probably due to the particular financing deal that allowed the first game to be created. This makes the trail a bit hard to follow, as the original publisher, Sierra, was a subsidiary of Vivendi. Now, if you've not heard of Vivendi, think of them not so much as a publisher, but more of a trading card game within the video game industry. At various times in their existence, they have owned and operated such names as Blizzard, Universal, Massive Entertainment, and Sierra. They have rebranded and changed names at least 6 times, sold bits and pieces of themselves to various other corporations, including General Electric, and they finally merged with Activision back in 2007 to create Activision Blizzard. It seems that after the release of the original Empire Earth, Stainless Steel Studios immediately started work on a new game called Empire's Dawn of the Modern World. From what I can tell, this was essentially another attempt to do an Empire Earth style game, but with a slightly smaller scope, allowing for a more refined and coherent experience. A lot of the design decisions were informed by surveys of Empire Earth players, with feedback not a million miles away from the criticisms I made in my own video. This new project meant that Stainless were unavailable to work on the expansion pack for Empire Earth, so Mad Dog Software was brought in to handle that particular task. Although the reception of the expansion can best be described as lukewarm, the publisher was obviously pleased enough, as they re-enlisted Mad Dog to work on Empire Earth 2. Now, I'm not quite sure why Stainless was left out of this whole process, but it looks like they were probably busy on another title called Rise and Fall Civilizations at War, which would be Stainless's undoing and the company would go under during its production. Mad Dog were a bit of an odd outfit, mostly providing supportive development for other studios' projects or handling expansions and sequels for other studios' games. However, they wouldn't be totally unprepared for this sort of work. As well as the expansion for the first Empire Earth, they had also worked on Star Trek Armada and the Call to Power series a few years earlier. And that's how Empire Earth 2 was born. Mad Dog was a totally different group of people from Stainless Steel. They didn't have access to the minds that created Empire Earth, nor did they have access to the Titan engine that it was built on. But they had the funding, the intellectual property rights, and their own set of ideas, and so on they went. So, what does happen when a totally fresh team has a go at an existing idea? Well, in this case, it turns out to be something rather interesting. At a quick glance, it appears to be just your standard sequel, featuring many of the key elements of the first game with better graphics and a new UI. But once you dive in and you start playing, you immediately notice that quite a lot has changed. What I was expecting to find was a trimmed down and streamlined version of Empire Earth. Essentially the same game, but with the ambition and scope dialed down a little in order to create a more coherent and playable experience. I was not prepared for what I actually encountered, a game that had bigger dreams, more ambition, and an even greater feature set, but was somehow far simpler to play and easier to enjoy. On paper, the core mechanics are the same. You start out with a city building and a few citizens, who must gather a handful of core resources in order to build up your fledgling empire. They gather berries, hunt animals, chop trees, and pick at piles of stone so you can create other structures and then raise an army. This is all very standard fare, and it doesn't deviate from the original, although I was pleased to see that the intelligent exploration dog from the first game had been replaced with a more sensible scout unit. The first real sign of improvement came when it was time to start upgrading. The garrison mechanic still exists, but unlike before, this is now a two-way process, so you can station citizens inside a capital or a warehouse to gain bonuses to return resources, but you can also remove them from the building if you need them for other purposes. This adds some sense to an otherwise unnecessarily complicated mechanic. It gives you options and somewhere to temporarily place excess citizens until they are needed to replace losses from a raid or settle some new territory. This feature is also expanded to include a lot of different buildings. Military structures can serve as defensive forts when citizens are placed within them. Universities have a better output when you do the same, and dockyards repair the ships that you garrison inside them. Previously, this mechanic was undercooked and confusing, but now it's a core part of the game and one that fits in quite nicely. I was equally impressed with how upgrades and bonuses work. I had previously complained that it was convoluted and overly complex, with various improvement methods scattered around the interface in different buildings and screens. Empire Earth 2 has done away with all of that, and instead replaced it with a single, unified system that is tied into all aspects of Empire improvement. It works like this. You build universities, which generate tech points over time. Each epoch has a total of 12 different improvements you can purchase with these tech points, 4 of them military, 4 Empire, and 4 economic. Once you've researched 6 of these, you can choose to spend tech points to move into the next age. However, intelligent choices must be made. Although the benefits of the upgrade span multiple epochs, each epoch has its own set of research options, so if you decide to advance to the next stage without researching them all, you lose the chance to research those particular upgrades in the future. A player can choose to take the fast track through the epochs by only researching the minimum amount of upgrades, but a player who spends a little more time will actually come out of the other end with a stronger empire. I'm a big fan of this feature, as it gives a bit more room for strategic thinking when it comes to advancement, rather than just being a simple case of the faster the better. It seems that this sort of streamlining is present throughout many aspects of Empire Earth 2, including the combatants. Generally, each unit is placed into one of 6 categories that define its performance against other units. These are either infantry, mounted, or artillery, all of which can be either light or heavy. This is consistent throughout all of the epochs. Heavy infantry gets a bonus against light artillery. So a Bronze Age swordsman is a good counter to the ballista, in the same way that a modern age rifleman is ideal for taking out a light field gun. It's all very clear on the tooltip, so it's really easy to figure out as you go. This formula gets a bit more complicated with the air and naval units, but these are also very well explained within the game engine, so it's not too much of a hassle to get to grips with. One of my biggest complaints in my previous video on Empire Earth was how the game completely abandoned the concept of non-military advancements once you progressed past the Dark Ages. It felt utterly ridiculous to me that your citizens were still pushing wheelbarrows full of iron ore back to your city centre in order to build nuclear bombers and laser-armed combat walkers, and it made advancement feel a bit like a cheap gimmick. I was pleased to find that Empire Earth 2 had made some attempts to rectify this. It's not a complete overhaul, but there are enough differences as you progress through the centuries that you do get a real sense of advancement. The first major change is how resources are handled, being split into 2 categories, regular and special. The core 4 of food, lumber, stone and gold remain consistent throughout the game, but the 2 strategic resources change over time, starting with tin and then moving into iron, saltpeter and then finally more modern requirements like oil. Gathering methods also change for these resources. So although in the Middle Ages you'll be digging up iron ore by hand, in the modern ages you'll be building oil derricks and uranium mines to extract the most precious commodities. Other entities also reflect this. In the later ages, the trade unit changes from a donkey and cart to a goods truck, and the modern wonders include things like a desalination plant and a solar power station. These nods to the industrial and modern eras are a very welcome addition, and I really think it solidifies the feeling of progression. From a technical point of view, the game has the benefit of 4 years of advancement over its predecessor, and it really shows. The performance is great, it runs flawlessly on modern resolutions, and the poly count and texture detail is a huge improvement. It's also well presented, with a far cleaner and snappier menu system and no awkward resolution flips as it switches between the menu and the game engine. It's still a little too zoomed in for my liking, but this is just an uncomfortable feature of many early 3D games that had to juggle a midpoint between viewport size and frame rate. One thing I did find particularly welcome was the inclusion of an in-game encyclopedia like you would find in a Civ game, and it was nice not to have to tab out and dig through a community wiki every time I wanted to double check a particular unit stat or mechanic. The in-game interface is actually quite impressive, and it's got quite a lot of quality of life features that I would not expect to find in a game that's almost 2 decades old. The most notable of these is the picture-in-picture view, a mini game window in the bottom left that allows you to keep an eye on a separate part of the game while you focus elsewhere. There is a bookmark feature included with this, so you can flick between 5 or 6 different saved locations to check out what's happening at a remote outpost while you focus on the main action in the primary window. You can also issue orders using this window or swap it with your main view. Very useful stuff. I was also quite impressed with the tab screen, which gives you a top-level overview of your territory, where all of the resource locations are and how many citizens you have tasked to each resource. You can easily assign citizens to different gathering tasks from this interface without having to locate that citizen manually and order them to start doing something. Instead, you just right-click to unassign a citizen from a job and left-click to assign idle ones to something else. Another point I previously made about Empire Earth was how it dreamed a little big and caught itself in a difficult position somewhere between an RTS and a 4X game. Rather than shy away from this or pick a lane, Empire Earth 2 seems to have embraced this fully and added a whole diplomacy, territory and battle plan system, which is something I don't think I've really seen in an RTS before. You can propose alliances or non-aggression pacts based on territory rights and tributes. You can set up trade routes, dispatch spies, draw plans of attack, build transport links and a whole host of other things that would normally be far more at home in a grand strategy game. What's even more interesting is how the computer players actually seem to interact with this in a limited fashion, and a large 10-player game can have just as much backstabbing as it has front-stabbing. Speaking of computer players, it seems that the AI in Empire Earth 2 shares little in common with that of the original. As far as I can tell, it plays by the same rules as everyone else, and although it does get resource bonuses based on the difficulty level, this is to be expected. It has to build citizens, harvest resources, and then spend those resources on the things it wants, including research and advancement to further epochs. Unlike Empire Earth, it doesn't have infinite resources, reduced build times and full map vision, and as such it's quite enjoyable to play against. It's still an early AI, so it lacks much in the way of a game plan or any such depth, but it's perfectly serviceable and the skirmishes are quite enjoyable because of it. There are a whole host of other changes that are a bit out of scope for this sort of video, and generally I've found them to be all welcome and enjoyable. There is the crown system that awards temporary bonuses to the top economic, military and empire-minded players depending on recent performance. The game's factions are divided into nations and regions, each of which has different bonuses and unique units and buildings. It's not exactly what you call asymmetric design, but it does give the different factions a bit of character and variety. The multiplayer and skirmish modes have a random map generator to keep the experience fresh, and both of those game modes have a huge amount of customization. There are also several single-player campaigns, and although I've only played a few missions so far, I've been having fun, and I will be continuing on with them in the future. So, I guess the question is, do all of these improvements add up to a better experience? It really depends on who you are. Some people just love Empire Earth. They love the quirks, the complications and the sandbox nature of the scenario maker, and as it was the original and the first game of its type, it will always be the one they fell for and it will mean a lot more to them. If you feel like this, then more power to you, and I'm glad it's given you so much joy. From my point of view, with the benefit of 20 years of hindsight, I really feel that Empire Earth 2 is the better game. If the design criteria was to create a heavyweight midpoint between an RTS and a 4X that spans multiple millennia of human endeavour, then I think Empire Earth 2 does the job very well, and it succeeds in a lot of places where the original Empire Earth failed. Not only does it equal the scope and ambition of the first game, it often surpasses it, while still managing to streamline the whole process and avoid many of the possible pitfalls. I think Mad Dog Software did a great job on Empire Earth 2, and I'm genuinely impressed by their efforts. I noticed that they also created Empire Earth 3, which by all accounts is a terrible game, but that's a discussion for a future video. Hi there, thanks for listening while I shared my feelings on Empire Earth 2. If you enjoyed this video, then click the like button, and if you've played both Empire 1 and 2 and have got your own feelings, then please share them in a comment or on the Discord. And as usual, if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.